In today's video, we're going to talk about is identifying key signatures. Now, with identifying key signatures, one of the reasons why this is so important is because of the fact that it becomes a lot easier for us to understand, okay, what collection of notes are we working with whenever we understand a key signature. One thing to kind of keep in mind in general is this difference between a key versus, like, let's say a scale. So like when we're working through a key is really just giving us the information, like, for example, okay, what notes are sharps versus, flats, or specifically neither. Whenever we're talking about a scale gives us every single note, right? Because a scale, again, that comes from the Latin word of scala, but scale specifically is referring to each and every single one of the notes within the collection, okay? So that's something to just keep in mind, is that the scale has a lot more information in it because it has all of the notes, whereas the key only has information on the sharps or the flats. Now, this becomes really, really important for us because it helps us to understand, okay, what notes are going to be sharp and flat throughout a piece of music. And then also it actually helps us to understand what chords that we're going to be using, right? The thing is that whenever we talk about that idea of diatonic chords, which are chords built from the notes of a scale, again, those sharps or those flats will determine whether or not certain chords are major versus minor. Now, there are certain tricks for figuring out these key signatures. Before I go through the tricks, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you how these tricks actually end up working. So originally, when they, of course, ended up coming up with the idea of the major scale, so that order of 2 whole steps and a half step and 3 whole steps and a half step, all they did was they first started with C major, which has, of course, no sharps, no flats. And then what they did is they just copied and pasted that and started from every single letter. Now, afterwards, what they ended up finding is that there's a little bit of a pattern with every time that we add 1 sharp. So what they ended up finding was that after C major, the next key that ends up showing up is G major. Now, in G major, all of a sudden, we're adding 1 sharp. And the sharp that we add is specifically the second to last letter here, which is a half step below, G, which is the tonic, as we would call it, of the scale. So, and again, mind you, before that we have C major that has nothing, okay? Now that distance as well is kind of important. This relationship is a relationship of a fifth. If you're unsure about any of the words that I'm talking about, again, there are going to be videos on these different things, so you'll want to look out for them. Now, when we're talking about the next scale, as they ended up going through and finding them, they ended up finding that the next scale actually is D major. So D major keeps the F sharp that we saw before, but this time what ends up happening is, again, on the second to last note, the half step below the tonic, that's where we get our new sharp, C sharp. The distance from G to D remains a fifth. So as we're going through, again, this actually keeps going. So from D to A. A major was the next one that they found. It keeps C sharp, it keeps F sharp, and then it adds 1 more, specifically G sharp. Again, the half step below A. So you'll notice 2 things that are really, really important within this pattern, is that every time that there was an increase in the sharp keys, the new sharp that was being added, first of all, they would accumulate, of course, the sharps would, but the new sharp that was always added was the half step below the tonic, or the first note of the scale. The other thing that they noticed was that every time that they would end up increasing by 1 sharp, that next scale where we would find a new sharp was always a fifth away. That's where the idea of this circle of fifths comes from, at least the very, very beginning of it. With the circle of fifths is this idea and this kind of clock, if you will, which really isn't a clock, and it's not really much of a circle either, but it's a good way for us to visualize, okay, how exactly do we remember where all of these scales are, or which key that we go to next when we're increasing by, again, 1 sharp. So again, at like 12 o'clock, we would have C major that has nothing. But again, as you end up going to the right on your piano by fifths, you end up finding all of the scales that end up increasing by 1 sharp at a time. And the thing is that you always increase in sharps until every single letter that you have possible, so C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, until all 7 of those letters are all sharp, which eventually that's going to be C sharp major. But again, these 2 ideas are really, really important. First of all, the fifth helps us understand, okay, the circle of fifths, where that comes from. And that, again, if we go up, so to the right on the piano by fifths, we're able to find, okay, what is exactly the next key that adds 1 more sharp. And then this half step relationship, understanding that, okay, so every new sharp is a half step below, is where our first trick comes from when we're identifying keys. So when you're looking for the sharps, step 1 is that you just really look at the last sharp that shows up. Again, the newest sharp. Now that last sharp is on the right side here. So here we have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and then D sharp. So D sharp would be that last sharp, the newest sharp. Then from there, you just go up a half step. And the reason why, again, is because of on that back side there, the new sharp is always the half step below the key that we're actually in. So in this case, because it's a D sharp, that's our last sharp, we go up a half step, and then as a result, we land on E. And so we are in the key of E major, which is really, really fun. Okay? So that's specifically the trick for sharps. If that ended up going right over your head, that's perfectly fine, because we'll end up practicing that here on the bottom with some of these exercises. Now for the flats, again, similarly to the sharps, all they did is that they went through, again, all of the letters. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about the major scale in general is that there are certain rules that we have to abide by. If you watch the major scale video, specifically, you can't have mixes of sharps and flats, and you can't skip over any letters. So there were certain times where they, for example, found like F, right? They started on F. And what they found is that you have F, up a whole step is G, up a whole step is A, up a half step is not A sharp, but it has to be B flat. Has to be B flat, then C, then D, then E, and then F. Okay? So the moment that you get to F, you realize, okay, so there's actually going to have to be keys that require flats, which is really, really interesting. And so similarly, what they ended up doing is that they ended up going through and then, again, finding all of the keys that have flats, all the way until every single one of the letters ends up getting assigned a flat. So what they ended up doing is they ended up looking for, okay, what's the next scale that ends up having a flat in it? That next scale ended up being B flat major. So B flat, then C, D, E flat, F, G, A, and then B flat. Now, this is where relationships, again, become really, really important. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, put my C major up here so that we can kind of see what's going on. So going from C major to F major, you'll notice the 4th letter in the scale is the one that adds a flat. When we go to B flat major, so the B flat, again, we accumulate. So B flat stays. We add a flat on the 4th letter of the scale. So one way to, of course, determine, okay, where exactly are we adding, these flats? Every single time it's going to be the 4th letter of that scale. Now, another funny thing that you can kind of notice is 2 other things. First of all, from C to F and then from F to B flat. Those distances are, this time, 4ths. Now, you might be wondering, okay, why are they 4ths? I mean, we have the circle of fifths, but even with the circle of fifths, it's not like a full circle. Like, I thought the circle of fifths, some of you might know that it has all of the key signatures on it. The reason why is actually because of this idea in music, which we oftentimes refer to inversion. Now, this is not necessarily chord inversion. Chord inversion is different. Inversion, or to invert something, always just means to flip it. So again, inversion at its most simplest form really just means to flip something over, okay? It's all about flipping something over. So if you take a look at this for a second, if I'm going up to F, like C, D, E, F, that's 4 letters, right? That's a 4th. What if I flip it the opposite direction? If you notice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I start on C and I go to the left, if I go down, it's a 5th. So this is why I oftentimes say that the circle of fifths is not really a circle. A lot of the times it's actually like starting at this pinpoint at the top of our clock and then going both directions, opposite directions. So for example here, then we would end up going down to F. And then after that, this is where things get tricky because intervals are always built off of the bottom letter. So you have to figure out, okay, in what key or in what scale is F the fifth? Now, luckily here it actually tells us it's B flat. Now, the reason why it's B flat is because in the key of B major, eventually when we get to B major, which is after E major, at that point, F is going to be sharp. So F natural doesn't exist. And so that ends up becoming our issue. But that's something to kind of pay attention to is that, again, you could always go up by fourths from C to figure out all the flat keys. Or what you could do is you could just go down by fifths. That's where the circle of fifths comes into play. But again, this rule of every fourth note of the scale is where the flat is added. Now, what's really, really cool as well is that if you notice, that fourth note is also the first note of the new key that we're dealing with. So like B flat here that we're adding, in the new key, right, that's specifically the first note of the new key. So that idea is really, really important for our next portion. For the flats, the trick is to look at the second to last flat. So like, for example, again, if we have A flat, it's going to be E flat major, okay? E flat major. And again, we can go back to this and see that. So if it's E flat, again, that we're adding, it's going to be 4 letters down, which is B flat major. If it's B flat major, again, it's going to be 4 letters down, F major. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you're going through this example, okay? This has been specifically a video on explaining how to identify the keys. In the next video, we'll go ahead and work on practicing identifying and completing this bottom portion. If you want to go ahead and try it on your own and then take a look at the next video, in the next video, we'll go ahead and talk about the answers.